Tim, you still look about 22.
It's the only benefit. Can you imagine how hard it was for me to get a beer when I was 21? Now it's kind of payback time because I've still got my hair and I'm looking relatively all right. So I don't know how that works. It's just the genes.
Well done.
Nothing to do with nothing to do. I think. Should we get Ricky Gervais out early doors? Do you think? Or what do you think? Wales knows the story.
I do know the story, but refresh me. You were his manager, is that right?
No, I wasn't his manager. No. The story is that the Kelly's Heroes, which was the amazing band that the Martin was in with Richie and the rest of the crew, were approached by a couple of managers, and one of them was Ricky Gervais, and the other one was me. And
rival managers, we should say.
Rival managers, yes. And they chose me, which obviously went swimmingly. And I have these sort of recurring thoughts. It's like a sliding doors moment, where you're literally where I'm watching The Office and I see co-written by Martin Aaron on there. As opposed, if he had just decided to have Ricky Gervais as his manager, because they would, Martin Aaron and Ricky would have got on very well, and they would have been cracking jokes all the time, and then there would have been a writing session, and The Office would have been born with a different person involved.
Do you reckon?
I don't like to dwell on that too much because that's.
I can see another thing where none of those Kenzie McCrook, what's his name? Mackenzie Crook, Stephen Merchant, Ricky Gervais, none of those people have careers. Because we took him on as our manager, and that was that. And he just never went to do any of those things on the radio or whatever.
Well, I was having a conversation with someone about that the other day not about that, but I was saying because I had a meeting with Radiohead to try and manage them.
Really?
Yeah, and they went with a local guy who could give them free studio space, as you are when you're new and bad. So they went with this guy in Oxford who had a recording studio, and I was like, God, wouldn't it be amazing if I'd managed them? And my friend was like, yeah, but Tim, you might have signed them to Jive Records, and then nothing would have happened. And I'm like, well, it's not really the way I'm looking at it, But
if it makes you feel any better, Tim, we haven't invited Ricky onto this. So, if there is still a degree of one-upmanship, you've won this round.
Well, it's just there's so many sliding doors moments when what could have happened and what,
I think maybe the Battle of Camden would have been brought up. Was that menswear?
That was menswear, yeah. I think probably there's lots of stories, but we weren't even in the room then, were we? I don't think. When menswear had a big fight at a gig somewhere, that's all I remember about them. But I don't think we were involved. I can't remember.
Well, no, we were, but we hadn't met you then. That was pre you. Yeah, right. But we were in the news. We were in the NME for a fracas with menswear before we'd done anything. So,
was that the first and last time you were in the NME?
Probably, yeah.
But anyway, it was a hell of a couple of years hanging out with the Kelly's Heroes boys.
So we went with Tim rather than Ricky Gervais because Tim was a established band manager and a NME photographer. You were still doing both at the time.
Yeah, I was. Yeah. I sort of managed to keep both going for quite a long time.
So should we start with the photography and then talk about the bands?
Yeah.
So, what first of all, what was your first ever job?
What for the NME?
Or anything? What
happened was I was
gainful employment. You did.
Yeah, I was working as I was into photography when I was in at school, and they had a little darkroom there randomly, and I don't know why, but one of the masters was really into it, and so I used to. It probably wouldn't be allowed now, but I went in the darkroom with him and processed films and stuff. I found it very fascinating. And then I got a holiday job at the Basingstoke Gazette, where I was trailing around because my dad knew the editor, trailing around with a couple of the photographers there. And then I got another holiday job at the Farnham Herald in Surrey. And literally, I was standing there, and so I did the summer job, and then I came back the following summer to just help out in the darkroom, and I was standing there one day, and the staff photographer had a row and walked out. And they said they looked at me and said, "You can take pictures, can't you?" And I was like, yeah. So I then started as a full-time photographer for the Hazelmere and Farnham Herald, which is local newspapers. I don't even know if local newspapers exist anymore, but what it was great at, it was amazing because I was taking sort of 10 rolls of film a day, you know, and doing it for 3.5 years, and you just pick it up really quickly when you're doing that. I mean, very dull. Some of it was incredibly dull.
So how old were you? Had you left school at
no, I'd been to Bournemouth University and done an HND in business studies.
Okay.
And then that was just after that. So that was literally so
you're like 19, something like that?
20. 21, something like that. I can't remember. Yeah, something like that, maybe.
Tim, did you ever have any scoops? I mean, you know, was there any sort of like, you know, big Farnham scoops that you got sort of like, and you were the first person on the scene? And
not really. I mean, there's
a
couple of car crashes and stuff. There was an extraordinary moment, which I just remembered about the other day, where I was sitting in the office on a Tuesday afternoon, you know, and I was about to go and do another golden wedding or whatever it was. And someone came up to me, came into the office and said, "Do you know the Monkeys are rehearsing next door?" And I was like, "What do you mean, the Monkeys? The band?" And he said, "Yeah, the band, they're rehearsing for, they've hired the pub next door and they're rehearsing the pub next door." And I was like, "No way, not in Hazelmere. They're from California, don't you know?" And so I sort of walked over and I knew the guy in the pub because it was next door. And I've been there a bit, as you can imagine. And he said, "Yeah, they're in the back room." And I walked in and it was Peter Tork and David Jones from the Monkeys with a session band rehearsing. And I sat there all afternoon hearing them playing Daydream Believer. And so I took pictures and I managed to sell one of those to the Melody Maker for £35 or something, or whatever it was. Everyone loved me. You know, I could walk in anywhere. I mean, it got really tedious though, because it was so you can't really do it for more than 2 years because it just fries your head. And also all the journalists were like middle-aged women. You know, they're just sort of, it was just bizarre, the whole thing. They were like, "Oh, Tim." And it was just hilarious. But it was amazing. It was, you know, I was being paid to be a photographer. So
sounds like a BBC Two comedy.
I mean, there probably is some, yeah, there is some legs in that one.
I've got a name for that series. It's Peyton and Bradley, and it's a play on General Omar Bradley and George S. Patton.
Yeah, it's a little bit niche, but we can work on it.
No man's putting it on yet. 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 But I was going for a minute.
So how did you get from
because I had free film, they gave me like a box of 100 film every 2 weeks. I used to go out and photograph bands every night around the local area. So I used to go up to the Buzz Club in Aldershot and loads of places in Basingstoke. And I used to drive out and randomly photograph bands because that was kind of what I was interested in, really, was just doing that. And so I slowly built up a portfolio of pictures of local bands, really. I don't know really what I was thinking of doing it, but it was just like I was going to gigs anyway, so I thought I might as well photograph them. I wasn't, you know, none of this. You have a particular big master plan about any of it, you know. So I remember I put my little portfolio together, and I just phoned up the NME and said, "Can I come in and show you some work?" And there was a woman called Helen. I can't remember her surname now, but she was on the picture desk, and I walked in, and there's in your career, there's one or two moments you look at, which is just a kind of you don't think it at the time, you just think, so I was halfway through the portfolio, the phone rings, and she goes, yeah, right, okay, shit, oh, damn, okay. Put the phone down and turned around at me and said, "What are you doing this evening?" And I was like, "Nothing." And she's like, "Well, you're going to go and photograph that petrol emotion at the Town and Country Club." And I was like, all right, who are they? I had no idea who they were. And so at that point, I had to go back down to Hampshire to pick up my cameras on the train to my parents. And then I had to go back on the train up to Tannis Country Club in North London. And then I had to go back to my darkroom, which was at home, to process the film overnight, and then back up the next morning to deliver the pictures. So it probably cost me more than 30 quid I got. But you know, I had a picture published in the NME, and then they booked me again, and all of a sudden,
amazing.
That's what you're doing, you know. It's like a lot of lucky breaks, and I mean, my theory on lucky breaks is you need to just be kind of half good so that you make the best of them when they show up.
Yeah. And you need to be there in the first place. I mean, you were there.
Yeah,
you could have been at home going, I won't bother.
Yeah, you know, when you're 21 or something, you don't think twice about phoning up the NME pitch desk and blagging your way in.
Yeah.
So I got quite friendly with Steve Lamacq. It was Danny Kelly, James Brown, all those kind of legends. Terry Staunton was there. Andrew Collins was there. And the other photographers were people like Kevin Cummings, Martin Goodacre, loads of people. It's a really, really rich time for the magazine. And suddenly, you know, I was in there going in 3 or 4 times a week and then going on road trips with Steve Lamacq and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So that was kind of interesting. And then at the same time, I got, because the NME didn't really pay, so I got a job at a music management company randomly as well. So that's when I started managing bands at the same time.
Well, okay. We'll talk about managing in a minute. Go on. What were you going to say, Miles?
I was going to say, can we go back? So sort of, so when you were, I guess, in Hampshire, right?
Yeah.
What did you do during the holidays to earn a few quid?
Well, there was always a couple of pubs I worked at. And then there was this thing that I did. Do you know, what was that thing on TV where it was really early TV advertising, teletext. Do you remember?
Yeah.
I had to go up into an office in London and try and sell advertising on teletext. This is really showing my age now. And it was a commission-only job. So I sat phoning up random companies for 2 weeks in this office in London, and I didn't make any sales at all. So I wasn't really very good at it. What else did I do? Yeah, I mean, it was where I was. It was just kind of pub and bar work, really. There wasn't really anything else, you know. Around.
I think we should have a section on tell us your pub story. We forgot to ask Vicky when we had her today, but we should ask everybody. Tell us a story of when you worked in a pub, because I think everyone's. We got one. Yeah,
I was just, you know, when you're that age, my mind was somewhere else. It's like you're not very present at those jobs because you're thinking about moving to London, or this is just really part-time. I'm only doing this 3 weeks to earn a bit of cash. So obviously, I didn't do half the things I was supposed to. I was very bad at working out the change. When people gave me a tenner, I couldn't really figure out how much money I was supposed to give them back.
Give it back to them.
Yeah, and you know, and there was sort of things like I was washing up in a kitchen. And the guy at the end of the day said, "Can you just clean the floor?" And then I forgot and just left without doing it. That sort of stuff, you know. And I had a little moped at the time, and I was just buzzing around on the moped to try and do these jobs, and you know, kept on breaking down. And you know, there's no way of, you know, you couldn't phone anyone then, so you just show up an hour and a half late, and covered in oil and all that sort of shit. You know, it was just, and I had no idea. And so, I mean, I think most of them they just let me go because I didn't see myself as working in a pub. That's not my vision.
It's not my calling.
I mean, I guess it's, you know, I was probably from a very privileged background where I sort of didn't really think that you know, that was something I had to do. But I mean, I don't know where your head, I can't remember where my head was when I was that age. So, but I remember being pretty shit at it.
You say privileged background. That's our other question. What jobs did your parents and grandparents do?
Yeah. So, well, my dad was in the army for a long time. So,
right.
Which regiment?
He was a tank man, so it was the 13th, 18th Royal Hussars mostly, but which became something else.
2 RTR.
Yeah, so he fought in Malaysia with the army. Well, they didn't really fight; they were chasing shadows at that point. But it was around 1950 to 52 that he was in there. So that was towards the end of them. And it's and then my mum was a scientist originally, but then she had 4 children, so she became a sort of full-time housewife. But then afterwards, my dad set up his own business, which was kind of it's a bit dodgy now, but it was like some military training aids. So it's still very much in the military kind of area. And I got he's died now, but he gave me his Filofax, and he'd written down everywhere he had been in 1 year. And it was bizarre. He'd been to like Baghdad 6 times. And this was 1985, and all these places that you wouldn't have gone to in 1985, he'd been trying to sell helicopter flying courses or something. I don't know. So he was obviously really tenacious and really kind of trying to make stuff happen. Or he was a spy. I don't know. These things.
Fine line.
Yeah, he was doing something, but he had his own business, and I think he struggled with it. He found it very hard to kind of go. So it was, we lived in a nice house, and I ended up going to private school and stuff, but it wasn't like there was loads of cash knocking around. We were still in a caravan in Cornwall on holiday, and the Isle of Wight for holidays and stuff. It was very much that. There was obviously family money there at some point. Most of it was being spent by my parents, I think. So, but it was, Hampshire, idyllic,
It's interesting. I mean, I think from sort of 2 fairly sort of institutionalized careers, so the services and sort of scientific academia, to then sort of say, right, I'm going to be creative and I'm going to have my own business is. Where did you think that came from?
Well, I mean, so my father was in the army. Both my grandfathers were brigadiers, and my great grandfather was an admiral. So I kind of did buck the trend a little bit. I think I was a disappointment. I'm not sure. But, so my dad, I do remember my dad did send me to Sandhurst for 4 days on a kind of training course.
Really?
Yeah, to see if I was into it, to see if I liked it.
I didn't know any of this.
Yeah, so I went on the train and I went to Sandhurst, and all these really keen, people who were like, I'm going to be in the army, and that's all I'm going to do. And it was like a 4 or 5 day camp. And I just came last at everything. I mean, I was last at climbing up the ropes, swimming across the, and I think when my dad got the report back, I think it occurred to him that I wouldn't really be suited that. And he at that point, there was a bit of pressure up till that point, but when I really, really fucked up that 4 days, he sort of knew that I wasn't going to be in. But I mean, extraordinary. They were, they were pretty good. They just sort of let us go on with it. I don't know.
Yeah.
What age was that then, Tim, when you were at Sandhurst?
That must have been like a 16 thing, 16, right. 17, kind of just. But it was only like a week in the holidays just to see. Dad was like, just see if you like it. And I was oh, I'm not going to like it. I'll just fight and see if you will. So
it wasn't like your dream, and then you realised it was never in your.
It never really, no, and it probably should have, but it was never really, there was never any forcing to it. But I do feel there was a certain air of disappointment amongst my grandfather and my father and stuff. But anyway,
what about your siblings? Have they ever done anything in the
film? No, randomly, they're all really creative, really. I mean, my older sister's an artist, my younger sister's graphic design, and my brother's a freelance writer. Randomly, it's all been very creative. So I have maybe it jumped to generation. I didn't even do that. It was just, I don't know what it was, but we never had that. So
that's enough killing.
Yeah. We've made our contribution as a family.
We've made our contributions to colonializing the world, making the British Empire as it is.
Wow.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I know.
Tell me about the work you've done. Have you had lots of fun cleaning toilets in Uruguay? Tell us about the jobs you've had. Were they good or were they bad? It's all a waste of time. I'm gonna cry. Have you ever worked in bars, killing cows in abattoirs? Joined the RAF and learned to fly. Have you ever played guitar, driven soul or mended cars? It's all a waste of time and then you die.
So let's go back to the NME. I'm fascinated to know, how did it work? Were you sort of sent off to all around the world, or how did it used to work?
Well, more or less. I mean, they, you know, you'd get a phone call and they go, "Do you want to photograph something on Tuesday night?" And you go, "Yeah, I can do that." And you got paid by how big the picture was used. So, you know, it ranged from around 25 quid to 60 or 70 quid. And the problem is, because you're shooting film and stuff, it used to cost more than that.
Really?
Yeah, they paid some expenses. A lot of the times you were taken, like the PR person for Sony Music, you know, would accompany you to the venue or the gig or wherever it was, and you'll be with the journalist, and they'd buy you some dinner and a couple of beers, and you know, and so some of it would be expensed out. But the way you made money at it was, then what would happen is you'd do the job for the NME, you'd get on well with the manager, and then you'd end up doing a record company shoot, or a press shoot or something. So
yeah,
it was kind of like stepping stones to working with bands on their shooting their record cover or something. And so
that was much better paid, was it?
Yeah. So that, you know, for those you were getting like £1,000, 1,500 for something like that.
Okay.
So you that was the kind of the goal, was to do it. So the NME was just really just making friends and hanging out, you know, because they would say, you know, would you like to go on tour for a week with James or something like that? So you're literally on the bus with a band for a week, and the journalist and the band. So you get to know these people quite well for a brief period. But it's kind of weird because you're in their lives for a week and then you never see them again. So it's sort of slightly odd.
Who had the worst hygiene?
Manic Street Preachers were a bit dodgy at some point. Yeah, a bit weird. But no, most of them. I mean, you know, most of them were pretty. You know, a lot of the time you weren't really sleeping on the bus with them. You know, you were with the record company. You were in a hotel down the road. You know, you didn't have that much access. You weren't doing that much access. But you know, I did get flown to LA for a day to photograph someone, and then flown back again.
Who was that?
I don't actually. I was thinking about this the other day, and I was trying to look it up, but it was some rapper or something. It wasn't. I did Snoop Dogg once, which was really weird. The first gig I ever did in London, and it was. They were like, "Do you want to shoot Snoop Dogg?" And I'd heard of him, and I was like, "Yeah, great." And they were like, "He's on at 2 a.m. in a nightclub off Leicester Square," and I was like, "What?" So I kind of went to bed, set the alarm, got up, drove into Leicester Square, and of course he was 2.5 hours late. I remember coming out; the sun was coming up, you know, the nightclub when I photographed him. This is a dig, you know. And then he mimed for 3 songs, and that was that. So it was all chaos. But yeah, you know, I did get flown around a bit, some of the, you know, venues and stuff. So yeah, once you're in, you're kind of in, and as long as you continue to take good pictures, you know.
Did you do festivals and things?
Yeah, I did a couple of Glastonburys. I did a couple of Reading festivals. I did that one. I can't remember what it's called now. I can't remember. There was others I did as well. I did Glastonbury. I did Glastonbury in '89, which was amazing. It was a sunny one. Then I did another one, which was a wet and horrible one, a muddy one. And that was the one where I had to, because you had to get the film back to London to get processed overnight, because it had to go to press at like 10 o'clock the next morning. So I had to leave at like 2 o'clock in the morning to drive up the motorway and get to the lab. And I got back to my car and it was surrounded by tents. People put tents all the way around it. Literally. I could see a path about 4 tents away that I could drive onto, but I had to look into the tents, make sure there's no one in there, and let the tents down and then drive over the top of it. Can you imagine if you got back to your tent and someone had driven over the top of it? But what could I do, you know? I mean, so that was interesting. But I mean, but those, yeah, and I remember really well that I was the main NME photographer, and on the Sunday afternoon, I was running out of film. I got overexcited. I remember thinking I can take 5 shots of this band, 5 shots of the next one, and another 10 of the last band, and that's it. Literally 10 frames, because I had 1 roll of film. And that's what people forget with photography, is that you're carrying, you're carrying the film in your bag.
Yeah. And now it would be almost infinite.
Well, but now also you'd just go to your laptop backstage and you wouldn't have to travel back.
You wouldn't have to drive over any tents.
You wouldn't have to drive over any tents. You wouldn't have to go anywhere. You could just send them off and go to the bar.
Yeah. All the fun's gone now. It's boring.
It is bizarre to think first time I ever started working with photographers, the only way of showing pictures to people was to actually physically have the picture in your hand and show it to them. That was it. You had to make a print and show them the picture. You couldn't. You could put it in the post, but that was, and it's so bizarre that everything's changed in 25 years.
So how does I guess with that sort of proliferation of tech around photography and the quality, I guess, as well. How do you make money out of it now? I mean, what's the sort of, how's that changed? Not how do you make money? How's the marketing and the distribution and the finances changed in that time?
Well, it's interesting. That is the big debate that we've been having in the last 10 or 15 years. But what has happened is that if you were, 25 years ago, if you were a young photographer in Mexico, and you wanted someone to see your work, it was probably in London to see your work. It was impossible. You'd never, and the big London ad agencies only booked 35 photographers that they knew because they had no way of finding out about anyone else. And they used to, hire the same people to go around the world and do pictures. Whereas now, if you are that young photographer in Mexico, you can at least send your work into an ad agency in London and people can see it. So in some ways, it has kind of opened the whole thing up, and it has kind of leveled the playing field a lot in terms of that, which is a really good thing. So the access to it is good. But then on the other side, there's just a lot of people doing it, and it's very similar to the music industry in a way. I mean, the technology now has simplified it in a lot of ways, but made it harder to make money on it on other ways. I'm still a big believer that good stuff always rises to the top. But it's harder and harder, I think, now. I mean, I'm working with a photographer at the moment who's got 1 million followers on Instagram, which is interesting. I think people are still keen to book good people who are going to make their brand look good.
Yeah, I started following you on Instagram today, so accept me.
My other 25 followers will be delighted to see that you're right.
We'll put a link on here, and then you'll get at least 2 other followers.
2, yeah. I've only posted 4 pictures this year. I mean, Christ, how useless is that? Anyway, yeah.
But I noticed that you had posted a picture of you and the names escape me, a New York photographer who did some 9/11 stuff, post 9/11 stuff.
Steve McCurry, yeah. Steve McCurry.
No, there was someone else as well. He must be 90 now.
Oh, I think that is Steve McCurry. I think that's the only guy who's done that. Yeah, quite possibly. Or that could be. Yeah, I think that's could be one of the other Magnum photographers. I worked at Magnum for a few years, as you know. I'm just trying to look at it here. Oh, Josef Koudelka could be.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
I mean, those guys are absolute legends. I mean, I know Steve McCurry very well. He's quite a good friend of mine, and he did that very famous picture of Afghan Girl.
Oh wow, that's him.
Afghan Girl, yeah, he shot that one, and he's an absolute legend. He's 74 now, and he's still got more energy than me. I did a job with him in Barcelona end of last year, and he's just incredible. But it's very hard. I don't know if there's going to be sort of those kind of legends anymore, because they were a very small group of people making incredible pictures in the 60s and 70s, and it's now, you're one of 2 million, 3 million professional photographers now who are trying to make your name. So I don't know if there's going to be like superstar photographers anymore coming through. There might be 1 or 2, but It's very hard. But
it's a bit like music, isn't it? I think you see at festivals now that maybe Arctic Monkeys are the last band properly big enough to headline.
Yeah,
because everybody since then it's great. They come out of nowhere and they've got a small little following and a niche little thing, but you could never consider them like a massive international superstar. That's
this conversation is like you still seeing, the headliners for these bands are the ones from the 90s still.
Yeah,
and there must be some others, isn't there, that we don't know about who are coming through that are huge? I don't know.
Well, I don't think you have that. It's not the same superstar global status that the Rolling Stones or Elton Bloody John.
Very similar. Yeah, very similar. I mean, the photo industry is very similar to the music industry in a way. There's a lot of similarities that during the 60s and 70s, people hadn't really worked out how to monetize it, and then the 80s and 90s when it all got monetized, and then the digital world came in and sort of threw the old models out the window in the sort of late 90s, early 2000, and then since then people have been figuring it out, and it's the same with with photographers. I mean, this guy who's got 1 million followers, he does a workshop for 25 people and it sells out immediately because people want to have the physical experience. They don't, there's so much digital world, but they actually want to go and hang out with a photographer. It's the same as going to a live festival gig. That's why there's so many festivals. Just people want the live experience as opposed to they want the analog experience as opposed to the digital. It's why vinyl's selling so much, is people want to have something in their hands that they can buy and look at and read the artwork. I think that still exists. So I'm still a big believer of all that stuff. But it is extraordinary how there's no one coming through the music industry. I just don't understand it.
Well, going back to the analog experience, tell us some tales from the mosh pit. Did you ever have any particularly exciting or
I mean, you do kind of, you probably forgotten the worst ones. There was one when I was doing Shabba Ranks at Brixton Academy. Another late night soiree into Brixton, and there was some gunshots behind me. People would start firing guns.
Wow!
So I was standing there. Shabba Ranks was on and doing a thing, and then there's people's gunshots, and then people started jumping over the orchestra pit into my area, which is where I normally stood to take pictures. And I kind of twigged pretty quickly what was going on. So the stage at the Brixton Academy is quite low; it's about chest high. I pulled myself up and I ran straight across the stage, straight out the back door, and just ran straight into my car.
I'm surprised your military sort of background didn't kick in.
I know my 4 days at Sandhurst came in useful. I mean, and there was a couple of other things. I went to Dublin to photograph. I can't remember what it was. It was someone like the Wu-Tang Clan or someone like that, and they because what they used to do is they said you can have the first 3 songs. You can only photograph the first 3 songs. So they stick you in the orchestra pit and you've got to photograph. And this time they said you can't use flash, which is an issue. So I've been flown all the way to Dublin, wined and dined by the record company. And there were 4 other photographers in the pit, and it was pitch black, and it was just strobe light. And we couldn't use flash. And there was dry ice and smoke coming over our heads, landing us, and none of us got a picture. none of us could take a single picture. And we all went up to the record company guy who just bought us a posh dinner in Dublin and said none of us got a picture. Sorry. And he was pretty hacked off. Yeah, the stuff like that used to go on, but that for me was disastrous because I didn't get paid.
So no one was on like a retainer where you get a weekly salary.
I think the journos probably were, but the photographers I don't think were. I mean, maybe there was 1 or 2 of them. Maybe like Kevin Cummins, one of the big guys were, but I didn't hear about that. But yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of those sort of things. I mean, I got bloody noses when stage diving, people stage diving. There's a good photographer called Steve Gullock, who's an amazing photographer. He did all the stuff for Nirvana. And we were standing on the side of the stage photographing Hole, which Courtney Love's band. Yeah. And Steve Gullock had 2 cameras around his neck. And he said, "Can you hold this for a moment? Can you hold one of my cameras?" and he passed me his cameras, and he fell backwards, and the crowd took him around. And as he was being taken around, he was taking pictures lying on his back, and then he was put back on the stage back next to me, and I was like, "How'd you do that?" And I gave him his camera back. He said, "Oh, I do that quite often." It's like, all right. So, you know, stuff like that where you're just like, hang on. So there was some, you know, crazy things. One of the most amazing things that I saw was Jeff Buckley. If you know Jeff Buckley.
Yeah.
We were invited to go and see him at the Borderline, which is a venue that Kelly's Heroes played.
He sold out.
Sold out. I should have mentioned that. Sorry, I've forgotten that bit. I can't remember counting the money at the end of that gig. Anyway, and none of us really knew who he was. And it was, I remember it was like a rainy Tuesday or something, and you're just standing there, and kind of no one really wanted to be there. We'd all been told to be there by Sony, which is the record company. And I just remember there was a lot of people chatting by the bar, and he came on, and I was standing right at the front because I wanted to get some pictures and get out of there quickly because I didn't, you know. And I can just remember him playing the first 5 or 6 chords of the songs, and people just went, you could hear jaws hitting the floor, and they just could not believe what they were witnessing because that voice was just unbelievable. And so you're sitting there, and I remember turning around, and people were just like staring, and everyone literally had their sort of drink in their hand and were looking up at the bar and just stared at him. And there was it was just one of those moments where people could not believe what they were hearing, and you're just in the thick of that. And I remember taking, I after about a song and a half, I remember to start taking some pictures, and so there's a couple of moments like that where you're thinking this is actually incredibly special. But a lot of the times it's, you know, some band at the powerhouse you've never heard of. But yeah, I did some relatively big names over the years. I've still got a bunch of I've got a trunk of negatives that I'm slowly scanning that will be
I was going to ask this question, is why have you not got a book of all your amazing photos?
Well, it's weird. I was looking at my archive the other day, and I have got some incredible pictures, but a lot of it's live stuff. It's not kind of I was kind of the live photography guy. It wasn't sort of studio portraits and stuff.
Yeah, well, a book of live photos.
Yeah, I must do. Every summer I'm thinking I'm going to scan them, and then I get distracted. I've done about 100 now, so I'm just going to store them up and then put them out at some point. I'm extraordinary. I mean, it's like anything now. You know, I've got them on a picture library, and you know, you don't make much money from this stuff really anymore. I mean, if it was David Bowie or Michael Jackson or, you know, but you know, Radiohead at the powerhouse, it's, you know, you're not going to make it's not really iconic. I mean, it's there probably is about 25 iconic ones which I need to.
Bales and air and bales, bales and air and bales, bales and air and bales, bales and air and bales.
Tell us your top 5 biggest artists that you did.
Smashing Pumpkins.
Right. I'm going to make a list. Hang on. Yeah.
So Smashing Pumpkins, Nirvana.
We'll come back to them.
Yeah. And then I did Radiohead quite a few times. Blur, I did. Manic Street Preachers kind of times. So a lot of those kind of Britpop things I did. Pulp a few times.
U2?
I never photographed U2. I've got a funny U2 story though.
Go on.
I was sent to photograph because they were playing at Earl's Court on Acton Baby. I was told to go and photograph because the people had been sleeping in tents, queuing up for like 2 weeks to get tickets. So I went down to photograph people queuing up, and I was told to photograph the first person buying the tickets and stuff. And I knew the security really well, so I nipped in behind them and bought tickets. Literally. I was like second in line, and these guys had been in a tent on the street for a week. So I was like front row. It's like, but I never photographed U2. I did, and weirdly, I ended up doing quite a lot of comedy stuff. I did David Dill, Rob Newman, did Frank Skinner. So I did quite a lot of sessions with those people.
You were friends with Frank Skinner, weren't you? I went to a party. I went to a party at your house once, and he was there.
Yeah, he went out with a really good friend of ours, and so I went bowling with Frank Skinner a couple of times.
Any good?
A pizza. He's pretty. Yeah, he's got some good stories. You should get him on.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah.
I'm sure he'd love to.
Yeah, he's got some good stories.
Tell us about Nirvana.
Well, Nirvana, yeah, I photographed them a couple of times, but again, it was only live. The first time was they were first on at the Astoria, supporting a band called Tad, and the main band was Mudhoney. So they came on for 20 minutes before anyone else. And I don't know why I was there, because normally I didn't really do the support band, but I think what it was, remembering back, it was a Sub Pop evening. So at the NME were quite keen for me to shoot all of the bands, because it was like a collective Sub Pop thing. And this was quite early on. I got a feeling this was like 88 or 89 or something like that. That there's probably their first or second gig in London, I don't know. And so I photographed. I didn't really know who they were, but I did like half a roll, black and white, which I have since discovered. Got some nice. And he smashed his guitar right in front of my face.
No, really?
Oh, he at the end of the gig, he walloped his guitar on the floor, and I took a picture of it instead of picking it up. I should have picked it up, taken it home. But
Reassembled it.
I couldn't remember whether I always used to tell the story saying I took a picture of it, but then I actually did find the picture that I took of his broken guitar. Yeah, so.
Oh, well, that must be worth something, isn't it?
Yeah, it seemed a bit
framed, signed, limited edition print.
Yeah, it seemed a bit extravagant for Kurt Cobain first on the bill at the Astoria to smash a guitar. But anyway, there you go. Yeah. But you know, they were really good. And then I think I did them at Reading Festival once, and randomly I saw them and shot them live in Boston once, which was kind of random. But Steve Gullock was the guy they always asked for, because they were really good friends with him, this photographer, this NME photographer. They never, they were very keen to work with people they knew. So I never sort of went on tour with them or did a portraits of them or anything. There was that really famous portrait of Kurt Cobain, which is just his face, which is a really famous, that was done by a guy called Martin Goodacre, who was one of my contemporaries at the NME. I mean, I could have been asked to do that session. Just I don't know why. Maybe he was in the office at the time. It was incredibly random who got what. If you were kind of there and something came up, they were like, "Do you want to go to Southend to photograph Oasis or something?" And then there you are.
Does the NME still exist?
It's online. Yeah,
right.
They're gonna shit out an app or something at some point, and that'll be hard. Sell the content to Getty or someone. I don't know. I think it does.
And I was going to ask you, Magnum. So does that still exist as an agency?
Yeah, Magnum Photos exists. Yeah, it's been going for 75 years or something, and it's a strange place because it's a cooperative or collective or whatever they call it. It's owned by the photographers, so if you become a full member of Magnum, you have a share in the business, and so it's a slightly weird. It's a sort of this weird sort of upstairs downstairs feel to it, where you're sort of slightly beholden to the photographers. So they sort of walk in and go, "Book me a flight to Paris," and you go, "Why?" So you don't need to know. Just get me a flight to Paris. It's all that kind of stuff. So it's an extraordinary place, and there's incredible photographers, but they're always losing money hand over. They're just losing so much money all the time because it's very hard to make money out of a documentary photography agency now. So, I mean, it didn't used to be, but it is certainly in the last 15 years. It's quite hard to do that. And also, they've got big offices in Paris, London, New York, and Tokyo. So it was an extraordinary place, and I was hanging out with some of the best photographers in the world, and they are. It's incredible that these photographers make a decision to go and shoot pictures in a war zone when they could just take pictures of skinny models in a studio in Hoxton like everyone else. They make that decision in their lives. So that, there's a guy called Jérôme Sessini who's the hardest dude you'll ever met. He's a French photographer, and he spends his life in Ukraine. He doesn't have to. He could shoot other stuff, but that's what he's decided to shoot. You
never tempted to go and
not me? No. It's not on the Shabba Ranks concert is the hardest thing I'm gonna. No. It's weird. I sort of stopped taking pictures pretty quickly.
Yeah, I was going to say, you were talking earlier about the change in technology and everything, but as I understand it, you stopped doing photography long before any of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, you decided to stop going down the mosh pit in Brixton Academy and let other people do it. So you set up your own agency.
Yeah, so there were several reasons I stopped. I mean, it was just you kind of hit 30 and it you suddenly realize you're the oldest person in the room, and it's also I hadn't earned any money in my 20s, and it was all becoming a bit of a struggle. I had some bloody good times and some really good fun. So it was all getting a bit of a struggle. And also there was this thing, what happened at the NME was IPC magazine tried to make all the photographers sign a contract where they'd hand over copyright of the pictures of everything they took, which was really problematic because the only thing that we had was the copyright of the images. That's all we had. Once they'd been published in the NME, we could sell them wherever we want. So the guy who took, Martin Goodacre, who took that picture, really famous picture of Kurt Cobain, got 25 quid from the NME, and then, hundreds of thousands of pounds for the next 25 years from that picture. But if he had signed that contract, none of that money would have gone to him. The IPC would have owned the copyright of that picture. So it's a massive problem. And we were all sitting there and they were like, we need one of us. We need a representative who can go to management and talk them through this. And rather stupidly, I put my hand up. So I became the photographer's representative, and I went up to the management and I managed to talk them out of this because I was like, you're going to lose everyone. It's going to be awful. But they were like, yeah, but we can make some money. And I was like, yeah, but so I talked them out of it. And then, but funnily enough, my phone stopped ringing. Huh. Yeah. And that was more or less the last time I worked for them. So it was, my card was marked, as it were. And so I did a bit of a stint at the Melody Maker for a while, and then I did a bit of stint at Record Mirror. But at that point I was not really into it, so I just thought I'd manage photographers. So that's when I started. And I started off with a roster of music photographers because that's what I knew, and then I met a couple of advertising photographers, and then got into that world.
What's the business called?
That was Balcony Jump. That was
right.
That was Balcony Jump Management. So it'd been sort of the same thing as the music management to the thing, but yeah. So I had that photo agency for 18 years. That's how I went. Yeah.
And how did that come, or how or why did that come to an end?
Well, that actually, I made one mistake. I set up an office in New York, which cost an absolute fortune. And it was a bit of a vanity thing, but we were doing really well in London, and we thought we could take over the world, as you do when you're, I must have been 35, something like that, late 30s, early 40s, something like that. And I spent a lot of money on that, got quite in debt, and eventually it went bust, which was not my finest hour, and it was not a good thing, and it was actually voluntary. I had to put it into voluntary receipt. I mean, I could have kept it going, but it was shrouded in debt, and it was, I was going into London battling away, and I was just like, what? And I was literally thinking, well, I can always just go and drive the tractor down the road and do that, or get my pub skills back up to scratch. And I had no idea, and so I literally had, it was awful. I mean, I literally had to put it into receivership, shut the office, and walk away. And I thought that was it now, that my reputation was gone. And then Magnum phoned. That's when I joined Magnum.
All right.
Well, I thought that would be easy because, It's Magnum Photos, for Christ's sake. How easy can that be? But actually, that was incredibly difficult as well. But it was a job in photography. It was, severely badly paid, but it was, still doing something that I was interested in. So I was quite pleased to take the job. But it was there. It was. I think balcony jump being around for 18 years was good. We made a lot of money for a lot of photographers.
Yeah.
We had a really sound business for probably 10 of those years. And it was a weird business as well, because the way it works is you commission 25% off the photographers. So if none of them are working, you still have your overhead. You still got your office, you've still got the people who work for you. You still got to pay that month, even if no one works. So it was a weird business model.
How many did you have in your stable, or however you?
Well, it's kind of varied. It sort of went from 10 to 15 some years.
Right.
Some years a bit more. But it was never really more than 15 or 20 probably. We also, towards the end, we looked after hair makeup and stylists as well. So, but there were some amazing times. I looked after a photographer called Nick Turpin for 10 years, and he had some massive jobs in America where, he was earning 200 grand from it. So things like that, they're life-changing.
I've worked with Nick Turpin, or rather, you've given me 200 quid.
Oh, yeah, for modelling,
to be a model. Things.
Yeah.
I was once part of a giant question mark made of people for some bank.
Oh, really?
And I was actually in an office job, and you phoned me and said, "Do you want to make 200 quid?" And I just put my phone down and walked out of the office.
Yeah, we used to do that a lot.
And and I arrived at some studio somewhere in London, and loads of other people there, just a load of random people with nothing better to do that day. And there was a very nice buffet, and 200 quid, I think it was, which is a fortune then. Yeah. And all we had to do was stand in. He stood on a Nick Turpin, isn't it? Nick Turpin. He stood on a step ladder with all his, and took photos of us forming a huge question mark. And then there was another one where me, Kelly, and two girls from Kelly's office that he literally almost dragged off the street. We went and looked in some shop windows on the King's Road.
I remember that one. That was Barclays Bank, I think. Yeah. And there was some. Yeah, we were using. I was using all my good-looking friends. You see,
Well, no, for the really good-looking ones, you got Kelly. Kelly was in a Barclays wedding. I went to Chelsea Town Hall.
Yes.
To watch Kelly and his then partner get married,
which is a little bit awkward, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit of a jinx
because it wasn't actually getting married; it was just photograph land of getting married. But yeah, we had to. The whole thing about that Nick Turpin was quite interesting because he was a street photographer, and we had to recreate everyday life. But with advertising, you can't really recreate everyday life. You have to have people because you have to sign a model release form and have to get permission to use their faces in these pictures. So it was quite interesting in that you sort of had to, so you had to find people who looked,
normal
and not modelly, without being offensive. But just kind of people who could just, carry off the normal kind of stuff. A lot of the times we use casting agents who do street castings to go people on the street and say, "Do you want to be in the shot?" But then a lot of times I'll use the old Kelly's Heroes boys, and other friends I had.
They'll do anything for a good buffet.
Yeah, well, the buffet was the highlight. I think I don't actually remember that first one, Martin. My memory, Jesus. Yeah, but there were several of them. Yeah, but yeah, so that was incredible. Setting that up and working with those people, and I just enjoyed being around the creative process of those people. You learn pretty quickly. I remember the first advertising job I got with Nick Turpin, we had no idea how much to charge. We had no idea. None of us, neither me or him, had done an ad job. So I phoned up some buddies and they were like, "Stick it in at 70 grand." And we were like, no way you're going to do it. So, but we thought, well, why not? We've got nothing to do. So this is how a long time ago, we faxed the quote in. Do you remember faxes? Anyway, we faxed the quote in and we went out to the pub. And we were like, well, that's that. And they literally phoned me up that evening and went, yeah, fine. I was like, I could have charged 140 grand. So anyway, and it's like suddenly you're walking into a parallel universe, because you didn't know this world existed with photography, and suddenly you're getting ad jobs and they're paying really, really good budgets, and you learn pretty quickly how those work, and then suddenly you figure out what to charge, and you just kind of, and that's more or less kind of what I'm still doing really with photographers, is sorting them out commercially, making sure they're charging the right fees for what they do. So
predominantly on commercial jobs where you got the know-how to.
Yeah, so they phone me up and go, I've just been offered this job for Samsung. How much should I, can I do a budget? And so then I do the budget for them, and I do the production for them, and it just helps for them to have an advocate. And so, have someone else in the room who knows kind of what they're doing, and someone else on the calls to ask all the right questions. And that's where your sort of experience comes in, because I've kind of probably done most things now, experienced most things. I mean, I had one with Matt Stewart, who's a really good friend of mine, a street photographer, just before the pandemic, and he was asked by an American ad agency to do a shoot for Samsung on a mobile phone, and he phoned me up and said, I don't know how much to charge. And I knew the client, I knew the ad agency, and I knew roughly, it was like a massive global campaign, and we pitched for it. He got $200,000, and it's I mean, it's like
on the phone.
He was taking pictures on the phone. Yeah, it was really, really weird, because we spent 10 days in LA shooting it. It was just random, because it was hair, makeup, styling, models, the 35 people on set. The client shows up with the phone in a metal box, and it's all got padlocks up, because it's like a prototype. It's got padlocks. It was almost chained to his wrist. It was one of those, And they open, they've got these three phones. Everyone's going, whoa, man, that's amazing, wow! And then he has to stand there and literally, do the old. You can't see that because it's a podcast, but basically just take pictures on the phone. And it's kind of weird, with hair, makeup, and style. And so we did that in LA for 10 days. And I remember he got an advance, and I remember when the money pinged on his phone, and he burst out crying, because I mean it's a huge amount of money for a street photographer, and it's a life-changing amount of money. But my point is with the whole thing is, he probably, if he'd done it himself, he probably would have charged 20 grand or something. I mean, so it was but those sort of things don't happen very often. Those are once every 5 years. The rest of the time we're just fighting it around in the mud with everyone else.
One of the, I mean, you must have been exposed to some sort of fairly mundane requests from ad agencies.
Yeah.
Do you ever sort of end up in a scenario where you're saying, yeah, but what if you do it this way? Imagine it if you could do something less boring.
Yeah. I mean,
is that the extent of your remit as well?
Well, no, not really. I mean, the thing about advertising photography that people don't really understand is it's not your idea, it's someone else's idea. So they have a team of art directors and creative directors sitting there that they pay really good money to come up with an idea. So the last thing you probably want to say to them is like I wouldn't really do it like that. This is how you should be doing it, because that's not really your job.
Yeah.
Your job is to kind of make their shitty idea look as good as you can. Really, I mean, it's sometimes they have amazing ideas, but sometimes it's not them either. Sometimes they probably had 25 amazing ideas and 5 average ideas, and the client's chosen the average. The end client, the guy at NatWest Bank, who's the guy that the ad agency speaks to, has chosen one of the shit 5 ideas. So although there's lots of reasons why things get shot in a certain way, and that's not really for us to question it. We just have to make sure our job is to make sure it looks as good as it can, and we bring it in within a kind of a budget that's they can afford.
And creatively, do you still take pictures? I mean, is it something that you still sort of keep your hand in, or
I've got a little camera I use occasionally, but nothing particularly exciting. I mean, most cities I go to, I take my camera. I've got this kind of idea that when I get really old, I might take landscapes and stuff and sell them on them. But AI would have fucked that up by then, and so that's not going to That's not going to be working. So, but you know, I still, yeah, most places I go, I take pictures wherever I can.
Are you ready, Agatha?
If you are, Ethel.
This is no laughing matter, Gorse. Don't miss the bell. We're all mature adult people. Thank you and good night.
Shutterstock.
Yeah.
What do you make of them?
Well, it's like a lot of these stock libraries. They have some good pictures in them, but most of the time they've kind of driven the market down to the lowest common denominator, in that, you know, you can buy an image from Getty for $1.
Yeah.
Or from Shutterstock for $1. And it becomes very hard to build a business around if you're selling pictures for $1.
Yeah.
As a photographer, I'm talking as a creative. Now, if you're Getty and you've got 1 billion pictures, then that's a different thing. But if you're the photographer, I mean, there used to be a whole industry where people used to take pictures for stock libraries. Yeah. And, you know, they used to travel around the world taking pictures of the Maldives, and they're given to a stock library, and then the stock library will sell them at, you know, 10 grand a pop to travel agents and people like that. But the kind of the websites, internet, a lot of that stuff as mobile phones has completely trashed that side of it. But, you know, there are some, you know, I think I did some work at a picture library called Trunk Archive, who's really good, and they do sell some good pictures, and they've got it. But it's a question of, the problem with Shutterstock is they don't curate it. You look at it and there's just too many pictures. There's just too much stuff. There's too much noise. You can't find these. I mean, they've probably got good pictures, but it takes such a long time to find them.
Yeah.
So it'd be better to have, you know, 100,000 absolute amazing pictures instead of 2 million average ones, you know. So, but the price of these things is problematic.
What advice would you give to someone who was thinking of becoming a photographer? So someone who is, you know, at school or uni, and they're really sort of interested. What would you say to them?
It's weird. I go to Bournemouth College University quite a lot, and I do a talk there. And that's the talk I do, really, is that. And I think with all of these things, and it's so similar to the music industry, you've just got to find your lane and be as good as you can in it. So if you decide that you want to take pictures of, you know, still life pictures, just do that really well. Because what tends to happen with a lot of photographers, they try and be good at everything, and then they just get remembered for nothing. They don't get remembered for being good at one thing. So it's like, if what you want to achieve as a photographer is, if a client goes, I've got this shoot on taking pictures of bottles, you know, and immediately if they think of 5 photographers who are really good at taking pictures of photographers, you've got to, as a photographer, you've got to get your name on that list.
Yeah.
You're remembered for, you know. Similarly, you know, if they've got a lifestyle shoot, they'll come up with a list of 10 people, and, you know, if you're really good at it, but it takes a little while to become really good at it, and it takes, most successful photographers are in their mid-40s probably, probably less college at 23 or something. And it's, you know, AI is going to mess it up a bit, I think, at some point. It's not quite there.
Have you seen anything from, I mean, I know that AI is developing fast, but have you seen anything currently, AI, that you think is, oh, that's as good as something that a photographer could do?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some, they're on Instagram. You can look them up. They call themselves digital artists. They're not photographers. I saw one the other day. He's done these pictures of models, and they look as good as anything you'll see in Mary Claire or anything like that. And the interesting thing is, none of these people exist.
Yeah.
So for a brand, it's quite interesting, because what happens is they don't have to pay the model fee. They don't have to pay, you know, for studio. They don't have to pay hair and makeup. They don't have to pay a stylist. They just pay a digital artist sitting in his laptop, because it's a collection of 10,000 other images.
Yeah.
In a way that looks like a new image. So it's quite. It's going to be. I think there will still be people wanting to shoot real stuff, but I think for a lot of brands, once the technology becomes a bit easier, I think it's going to be quite an interesting. But we had the same thing with CGI. Everyone was crapping the pants over that, and, you know, people figured it out.
There's also the bias, isn't there? Did you see that thing? It was a campaign that I don't know who it was. It was someone had done. It coincided with the release of the Barbie movie, and someone had said, "Oh, what we'll do is we'll create a global campaign and we'll push the images through an AI. So, you know, I'm Somalian Barbie, I am German Barbie, and of course, it confirms all of the bias that's out there in the images."
Yeah.
So the German Barbie had a black SS uniform on. The Somali Barbie had like a headscarf and an AK-47.
Yes, I mean that's unfortunate. That's the internet, isn't it? I mean, it's the same. You know, they kind of everything is organized like that. You know, so there's some teething. But I do know some people who are really into it. But if you speak to any photographer and about it, and they just have a terrified look on their face and sort of run to the hills pretty quickly, because it's one of those things that no one really wants to think about it, because I mean, Getty, I think, has sold 1 billion images to one of the big AI companies, so they've got a lot of raw material to. But ultimately, what you're doing is you're taking a little piece of everyone's images, and you are stealing copyright. But it's a tough argument to have, you know?
What do you do anyway?
But we haven't talked about you being a band manager.
Yeah.
So you, whilst you were a photographer,
yeah,
you also set up Balcony Jump, which wasn't a photographic agency then. It was a band management company.
Yeah. So previous to that, I'd worked for a company called Globeshine, which was a company which had Simon Harris, my old buddy who I'm still in touch with, and a guy called Brian Helene. And Brian Helene had a roster of bands that he managed, and he got me and Simon in to bring on new bands. And so Brian Helene managed The Wedding Present, and there's a band called the Heartthrobs, another band called the Close Lobsters. He managed, and that's when I took on the Milltown Brothers, and that was the first kind of band that I managed really. And I took it on under that company, and Simon Harris had a couple of other bands. He had the band called the Flat. They're all very indie guitar bands. And I was in that company for 3 or 4 years while I was managing the Milltowns. And then when I left there and I was on my own as a manager and taking pictures, that's when I met Kelly's Heroes, and that's when Balcony Jump came in.
Tell us about Milltown Brothers, though. They had some success.
Yes, they did. Yes, not quite enough success to go on these, you know, big hits of the '90s tours that they do now. You know, they weren't. It was interesting. I found them playing I got tipped off by Steve Lamacq, and I went up to see this band. They were playing in a pub in Kentish Town, and there was just something very about them. They were very sort of California Birds, songsmiths, two brothers, quite interested, but they were from Burnley, so they were quite sort of working class kids, just writing beautiful songs. And so I offered them a spot managing them, and we got a publishing deal very quickly with EMI, which was incredible for a friend of mine. And then it took me 2 years of constant gigging. They just went around the country gigging, and then eventually they signed to A&M Records, which was incredible. And suddenly we were on a roster with Sting and the Police and Delamitri and all those other A&M. I don't think Texas was on there. It was a you know, they had A&M was big, and they made an album called Slinky, which they recorded in Bath and various other places. And then they went touring, and they toured with the Lars, they toured with the Charlatans. We did an American 2-month tour with the Wonder Stuff. They did their own tours, which they sold out sort of 500, 600 people a night. They did headline the Astoria. So it's all sort of 1,500 people a night. The album went in at 26, something like that. And they had a single, Which Way Should I Jump, which went in at 38. And they were on the Radio 1 playlist with a song called Here I Stand, which didn't chart, unfortunately. But it was so for a moment, they did TVs, they did a live TV on Blue Peter, they did a live TV on Wogan, all that sort of stuff. So suddenly we were in the, they were getting recognized in the airport. Suddenly we were in the, proper management kind of stuff. And I was having to take less and less pictures and just doing that and literally driving the van, doing whatever needed. And so it was, and then they did, tours of America. We went to the A&M offices in LA and got greeted by the guy who signed Joni Mitchell. All these, it's just random stuff. And so that was pretty incredible.
What was a 2-month tour of the States like then?
With the Wonder stuff. Yeah, I didn't do all of it. They were doing quite well, the Wonder stuff. There was like 2,500 people a night probably. But it was on a bus. So it was.
How long were you there?
I just showed up the LA and New York bits, the glamorous bits. But they had tour managers and people looking after them. They did all right. I mean, America, that never really happened, but they did a tour of Japan as well.
Did you go to that?
No, there wasn't a big enough budget for me to go to that. I wish I had. It's one of the things you think, sorry, I should have just gone, but I don't know what was going on at that point. But then, after the amazing success of the first album, they fired me,
They did?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, young bands.
What reason did they give?
Well, their tour manager started managing them, and he'd been really close. We'd been working with them for years, really close. And I don't know, really. I mean, it was just one of those random, I mean, yeah. And so then they did, and when I wasn't managing them, they did another album on A&M, which died on its arse, unfortunately. And that was that.
Well, fortunately, because you weren't managing them anymore.
Well, I mean, yes, at the time I was probably had a sort of smug face on it, but looking back on it, it was disastrous for them. But like I said, it wasn't, they weren't quite big enough. They didn't. It wasn't like the Mock Turtles. They didn't have one big hit, or one of those sort of Stereo Lab, or one of those bands that could, if they reformed now, they could probably do some festivals and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I barely heard of them at the time, and I think I knew most bands. But,
I mean, they weren't, but it was
sort of blonde, curly haired.
Yeah.
Remember, yeah.
He's I don't think he's still got that, sadly. But anyway, so that was incredible. I mean, I look back on that now, it's defining 2 years for me. It's incredible. I mean, you're just traveling around the world, and I couldn't believe how lucky I was from that point. So that was incredible. And then I started doing it myself. 3 or 4 bands. There's a band called Midway still I looked after. Kelly's Heroes, of course. We got close, but not quite close enough.
We'll edit all this out, don't worry.
Have you got any pictures of Kelly's Heroes?
I've got some, yeah.
You must have them. We should see them.
Yeah, I'll dig them out. Classics.
So, look, you're in a global photography competition for lifetime best photo.
Yeah.
You can submit one photo. What would be the photo, your greatest ever pick? Easy question.
Yeah, that's really hard. I mean, I think that Nirvana one was my favorite. I've got some prints of that on the wall somewhere. I mean, yeah, the live stuff from Nirvana. I mean, it's weird. It's not really about the picture. It's about the memory that you had with it, the experience you had with it.
So do you have stuff up in your house that's your...
Yeah, I've got a few. I keep on people keep on telling me I should put more up, but I've got some plans now that I've done some scanning. Yeah, now that I've done some scanning, I can do some. I mean, I got some pretty wild live stuff. I mean, there was things, where you're standing on the side of the stage and you can get pictures like no one else can. But yeah, I mean, the Nirvana one was the main one that excited me.
Do you miss it at all, or are you?
I do actually. I do, and when I'm at gigs, I very rarely go to gigs, but if I ever do, I'm always looking to see what the photographers are doing. And it's weird. I was watching Oasis documentary, and they had that. I photographed them at Southend where they did that big big gig with the Verve supporting, and the camera sort of panned in. You could just see the back of my blonde head. And I was like, "Whoa, God, that's me!" And it's like, you know, occasionally you think about it, but then you have to, you know, you have to know about the bands. You have to know what's what, and you have to have done your research before you go. I mean, there's little things. Even you had to know whether the guitarist was right-handed or left-handed, because that's where you stood. Because you needed to figure out. You need to know, you know, who's the main players in the band, so that you can get near them and take some pictures. You know, if the drummer was the singer, you know, you had to make sure that you're in the right spot. So you had to sort of know what you're doing a little bit. And I don't know whether I'll do that now, but maybe I should go back to it when I get to 65. Who knows?
Who was the most compelling? So if you think of all the people that you photographed live, were there anywhere you suddenly thought, oh, they're going to be brilliant because they were larger than life?
Yeah, well, I saw Suede really early on at a venue in New Cross, and there was something about Brett Anderson that everyone picked up on that night. And it's so weird. It's unfortunately, it is like the bloody X Factor. You just can't put your finger on what it is that's special about certain two people who get together. You know, a guitarist and a thing. I photographed the Smiths as well. Wow, and that was quite amazing. But that was when I was at uni. I just sneaked my camera into the gig, and I sneaked my camera into Live Aid as well in 1985.
Really?
Yeah.
Were you close enough?
I couldn't get close enough. I've got some really good pictures of the stage. If I'd been smart, I would have done what a sort of Martin Parr thing. I would have taken pictures of the audience. But no, I was just too keen to take pictures of the band. So I've got a picture of the big stage in Spandau Ballet about, you know, a centimeter high. But I used to turn the camera around and put it around my neck, and the camera would be in my back. And then I used to wear a little jaunty bandana around my neck to cover the camera strap, and just walk into the gig like that. And that's the way I did it. I didn't so try not to get caught.
Brilliant. Well, I think we can say thank you very much. That was fantastic.
Yeah,
nothing better than spending an hour and a half talking about myself.